what to do.
All right. So, any preferences in order? Otherwise, I would just start with the one that Sravu was contacting me yesterday, which is the one.
What to do.
All right. So, this is the one. Any preferences in order? Otherwise, I would just start with the one that.
Josh is hoping that the JSON document makes it into the next preview. So.
Yeah, and there's one for async streams that's not on the screen, but it's further down that I would really like to get into preview too, if possible.
Perfect. So let's start with this one here then. So last time, I think. What was that? Probably the easiest one to me is just.
This is the one where we reviewed everything except for the.
Except for the one parameter.
Yeah, the dynamic searching one.
Yeah. At the top, I actually wrote it like just the one. I extracted the one out.
Yeah, that's the one. So basically, this was the one we reviewed last time. This is the API shared we kindly read on, and then the only open work item was this one here.
Yeah. I provided some context below as to why it should be another build. The whole point of this API is to give flexibility to the user.
Right.
So we should give them the flexibility of doing something when there actually wasn't an attribute in it, I think.
Yeah, if they're actually different, then null is different than legacy. Because I think that was really the question from last time, is if null is the same as legacy, why is it nullable?
The other change I did from last time was like it was returning bool, and Jan commented that probably should throw an exception instead of returning false if there was something already set. So that's another change I made in the proposal.
Is there going to be a way to check if there's a handler already set?
I mean, you can try to set it, and if it...
A non-expensive way of trying to check if it's already set?
I mean, there's no get API in this.
The question is, what are you going to do?
Not register. Like, if there's one... If there's one not already registered, then you might be able to do something different. Like, not crash your app.
I mean, if you're opportunistic, that's just try, catch, eat. If you need the resolver to be the one you want, that's set it, and if you don't get that one, it throws. I don't see a need for exposing the isn't already set. Because most behaviors would be if it's set, throw, and that's just called the set method.
Yeah, so set will not throw today, right? It will just return false, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I mean, this one won't throw. Like in the top of this page, I wrote a different version of this that will throw below the approved API. This one.
Yeah, and so that was my question. If it's just going to be void and it always throws, then users have no way of determining if something's already set.
Yeah, but the expectation on this, I believe, is that it would be called from main. Did you paste your line twice? Okay, then we'll throw. Otherwise, you're not main, so you shouldn't be calling this method. So I don't
Sure.
like until we get user feedback of what a scenario looks like. I wouldn't.
I mean, you could also imagine the scenario where someone's got a plugin library and they want to register the ability to search for plugins for themselves,
For their own assembly.
for their own assembly.
You do that from like DLL main or from the main routine of the
Right,
plugin,
but let's say that you're a library that's providing like extension and plugin capabilities to like Paint.net or something, and you want to be able to, as a plugin into Paint.net, be able to search for your own shaders that you can load and then perform operations on, which is separate from the plugins that Paint.net wants to load. And so Paint.net itself could expose a mechanism to chain into, but you might want to check and see if someone has already registered so you know what you want to do.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is actually cooperative today, like all of the DLLs and plugins and things like that. So they can have their own protocol to check.
You just register it always against yourself.
I see the point that you're making, right? Like, say you have Newton software JSON, there are multiple entry points, and then first entry point could be any one of a lot of things, and so you want to have a way of setting it from any one of those points and not reset it.
Yeah.
That is true. Like,
because it just like it seems cheap to be able to expose a property is DLL import resolver set or something.
we can expose it. There are two things we can do. One is we can externally expose that, or we could just say that it's the same DLL having multiple entry points. That DLL implements its own check. So
But it also means this one I can no longer unregister, right?
Yeah, there's no unregister for now. There's no overwrite or unregister. We just want to see how it plays out, because with overwrite and things like that, like it could easily lead to case conditions and
Right.
it could lead to more bugs than people anticipate.
So is this will return? This will throw if the assembly is already registered, or if any assembly is registered.
Now, if a resolver is registered for this assembly,
Okay, only for this.
only for this assembly.
Okay.
Which seems reasonable.
Yeah. So I think really the answer is you should only register it against assemblies that you own, and then you would know the behavior and there wouldn't ever be a test.
Okay, that makes sense then. That was the part I was missing.
Yeah, I think though antenna's example, like that's the thing that will fall on the belly eventually, right? Like I think it works fine if you're the app, right? As soon as you have plugins, the problem is what is your assembly, right? Unification happens at some point, and like yeah, 3 plugins happen to have the same assembly in it, right? But then at that point you're screwed regardless, because well, what are the 3 plugin folders you want to use to load native dependencies, right? It's not that you can, like at this point you have to decide who the one is, and probably the only sensible model is, well, whoever registers the assembly, whoever loads the assembly first, that location should probably use for the location, but that might not be something that this API shape will allow you to do, because you kind of want to, you basically want to register almost like if you load an assembly with that identity, whatever that thing returns, that thing should register the callback, right? But like, there's no way to do that. So I think it's probably going to be fine. Or as fine as it can be. Alright, so then...
Is there any reason why we don't expose a Git DLL import resolver? That way someone can chain?
And that, again, that is left up to the individual process to do for itself. Like our model is just that in a lot of ways. Like even for ALCs, we don't support chaining explicitly. It's just that the process has to do its own chaining. You could add a get pretty easily, but the fact that we don't allow overwriting.
Well, because like if you don't allow overwriting, but you do allow chaining, then it works the same way a lot of our other resolvers have worked, which is that the first delegate in the chain, it will either return something or not, and if it doesn't, then the next thing in the chain gets invoked until someone returns true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the early versions of this API was written such that it actually returns the previous resolver if one is already set. Otherwise, it returns null and sets it. So if we think chaining, I don't know, there is no known use case for chaining. So we thought of just doing a set until we know of one. But
And the
it's
question
a
is,
fine thing to do too.
how will we support chaining in the future, though?
Yeah, if you don't consider it in the first, then
What's the signature of the delegate?
It's up there.
Up there, yeah.
It's at the top of the
DL
screen.
import resolver.
Yeah, I mean,
And presumably,
like, if the scenario is that something like Paint.net wants to support complicated dynamic binding, then they would just write their DLL import resolver themselves to be they expose their hooks for complicated binding, and you as a down level library shouldn't be changing the way they load stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's really my easy belief on this is Paint.net owns Paint.net loading. If they want it to be dynamic and extensible, then that's a feature that they should write, not a feature that we should support. So
Yeah, but who's calling this API?
Paint.net is calling it Paint.net.
Yeah.
Your application's calling it for your application.
and you're thinking from the main method.
Yeah, your assembly is doing it for your assembly. If you needed
So-
a late assembly, you did it in a static initializer.
so basically libraries would never do it for.
For the main assembly. Yeah.
Oh,
Library can do it for their assembly.
You would only, essentially, the argument you should pass should always be get executing assembly.
Mhm.
If you're doing anything else, you're probably doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So,
So
Well, but this is for resolving DLL imports for the assembly that contains them. And libraries are probably more frequently the thing that's going to contain DLL imports than the main app itself.
so if the library, the library somewhere in a static initializer would call this as like, oh, you've woken up a plugin library. I need to know what I do. So in a static initializer that fired in there somewhere before any p invokes ever would have gotten touched, it says, now here's the way you resolve things for me. So again, it passed this .get executing assembly. Like, who is the line of code right now that is calling assembly?
Yeah, but you're making the argument and saying the library calls this method.
Yeah, the libraries probably more often than not going to be the thing calling this method.
Right.
And that means that there's a lot of boilerplate that the main app has to pass down through to the calling library to be able to say, here's where I live, here's where you need to look for the default stuff, in addition to wherever you're going to want to look yourself.
But like for a particular assembly, it's already written in the same DLL, right? Like, why would you want to chain it? Like, you could
No,
really,
so like, if you have an app that exists in the root folder, and then you've got plugins in a subfolder, you're going to want to tell, the root app is going to want to tell the plugin, you want to look in these folders for any additional dependencies, in addition to these other places that you might be looking into by default.
No, but the point is, it's not arbitrary dependencies, but it's only native dependencies.
Right, no, I
But
understand.
why would the assembly itself not know all the locations? Because it should probably be wherever your stuff is in. Right?
Because there might be things that are shipped as shared central resources that aren't necessarily shipped side by side with the other thing.
But I don't think that there's any sensible way of saying, I as a library have these dependencies, and you as an app host have these dependencies, and we need to merge them together. Like, that needs to be written as a feature.
And that's what the chaining is. If you have chaining, then the root app registers, and then the other one registers as well, and then both can do their searches independently,
right.
and whichever one returns true, depending on the desired ordering.
Yeah, and when they both return true,
They
Now we have a policy problem.
They don't both return true. It's
Sure.
it's ordered.
they do.
No, one returns true, and then the second one never gets called.
Right, and now you have a policy in this feature of which one gets called first.
Which that's up to the app and the library to determine
So
who
this is a much
registers.
simpler model of we don't support any of that, and it has to be written in the app. So,
Well, I think
support it later,
you
yeah.
can still do this, right? You would like the way it would work is that if you are a plugin for Paint.net, then Paint.net gives you an API that says, give locations for native dependencies, right? And then the resolver you register for your plugin just has to do for each there. Because I think the problem is, as Jeremy said, I'm not sure there is a single policy that will always work, right? Maybe the plugin wants to use a different implementation from what the host already has, right? Like, maybe you bring a newer version of whatever native module you have, or you might be, because you're running on like 3 different versions of Paint.net, and you're saying, well, on certain versions I want to prefer my one over the one that they have, or whatever, right? And Like I don't know, like that's one of those things where like there's not a good answer, and
That's the policy problem.
the only thing I would say is like I'm concerned if you make statements like the app has to decide, right? Because in practice, like an API like this, I agree with Tanner. Like the most likely caller will be the library. Like the app will not call these methods ever, right? So that means you need to live in a world where you have a bunch of assemblies that are loaded into your process. Each of them happen to call this API, because that's honestly the only sensible model. Like if you write a managed wrapper over a native module, you don't want the consumer having to do any work.
I mean,
Like that's the whole point.
You know, like just thinking of how, if I would ever use this, right? It's if I had a bunch of my own helper libraries and they're not NuGet packages, they're just libraries that I use for me.
Right.
And I've decided in my app hosting, I'm moving all of the native assets into a subdirectory. I, in main, bind all of the assemblies that I know that I have as part of my thing and say, go look in that directory.
Yeah, but that's not how anybody works. Like
but that's the app model.
No, but what's my point is that that's not how
anybody.
anybody works. Like if you write a console app or a web app, right, and let's say you add a NuGet package dependency on SQLite, right?
Yeah.
SQLite gives you an x86 folder, it gives you an x64 folder, it has some content items in your project, and when you build your app happens to have two subdirectories for the x64 and the x86 binaries, right? And then all you do is you just call manage APIs against the SQL client API, and then somewhere deep in the balls of this thing, this one called this API to make sure the right ones are being loaded, right?
But whatever the app deployment model is, put that file somewhere, and it has to say where it put it. The DLL doesn't know. That's the big problem.
But my point is that almost anybody who provides native assets today does not require the app author to do any work.
That's typically how it happens here too. Like if the plugin has its own native libraries, the main app doesn't even have to know about it. Like only if they both somehow happen to deal with the same native library, then we deal with the chaining. And that case is not typical, I think.
Well, I mean, anytime you're dependent on something like DirectX, then you immediately have a shared model where you can either be using the one in the system root, you could be using one that was shipped side by side with the app, or you could be using one that's shipped side by side with the plugin.
Right. I mean, if for native, it's already global. I mean, our story is already global, right?
Right.
Most likely the app will load it, and if it's already loaded, we don't actually get into any of this. Like if a library is already loaded, you can only load one version of the native library, and then if the app and the plugin don't agree on the same,
that's not exactly.
That's not true. I know, but what I'm saying is, it's not totally true. Sorry, but what I'm saying is, if they don't agree, then we have bigger problems than like where we're looking for.
Well, and what about the case for like assembly unloading and native DLL unloading?
I mean, I don't know what the story for native DLL unloading is.
I believe we don't support it.
Yeah, for now. I mean, if there's even a
Okay, and so we can't. This says that we can't unregister a resolver. How's that going to work when assembly unloading happens and people are able to unload assemblies, then they load it again, and then they want to set a new resolver because it's a possibly different. It's the same assembly, but they need to do initialization logic, etc.
Sure. I mean, if we support unloading, I think we can visit unsetting at that point.
Yeah, presumably, if you unload, that clears the resolver because you unloaded the assembly, and the resolver is bound to the assembly.
Yeah, I would
definitely
expect
happen now. I mean, unloading the assembly that is definitely, as I said, it's just per that assembly object. So if you unload the assembly object, that case I'm clear. If you unload the native library, I don't even know what happens.
Yeah, we don't support it.
We don't support it now, but like if
Because it corrupts all your globals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, barring usage examples saying that we need something more complicated, I think that this is fine.
Well,
it is the most simple approach, and we can expand it later.
Well, I think that like just having an additional either is it already set or even a public static DLL import resolver get DLL import resolver would satisfy extensibility, the ability to determine if it's already set. It would allow chaining if users want or need to do it.
But it doesn't allow chaining.
Yes, it does. If you expose get DLL import resolver, then you can chain because you can chain delegates.
That would be kind of
How can
you
don't know
So how would
exactly.
chaining work? You would at least require set and not throw.
No, you can combine delegates.
But what would you do?
How would you? But you already like there's already one registered. How do you add one to that?
Combine returns a new delegate.
Yeah, and then you would
Modify it.
Yeah.
and then you would
It's not a new register,
overwrite the existing delegate. You wouldn't add. So what you would do is you would get the existing delegate.
Yes.
You would insert your new hook wherever in that chain you need to go, and then you would replace the entire chain.
Right, but this doesn't allow overriding.
Exactly.
So
That's what I'm saying. You would at
Yeah.
least need a set that doesn't grow.
Yeah.
And then,
Because you
again,
can't
I
use
think
the
that the
existing
test is useless because there's until we have a pattern where we would understand what someone's going to do with that other than grow, we shouldn't add it.
I think that's what we originally said. Like, if you want chaining, I think the most logical API shape is an event.
Yeah. Well,
that
events
is
don't
already-
let you. Events only let you add and remove your own thing. They don't let you reorder, and they don't let you inspect what else is there. And I don't know if that's an important distinction.
So
Fair enough.
I like this because it's very clear in what it does. And if we need a different model later, we can write a different model later.
Yeah. I mean, we could always make another delegate that's just more powerful if we needed to be,
Mhm.
and then just have an overload of this method. It should be a fairly straightforward change.
Yeah, I think given how complicated that space is, the fewer extension points you give people, the better we are off.
Yeah.
Um,
And then if we get concrete feedback of what isn't working for someone, then we can react to that. But while we're being speculative, I think that we should stay minimal.
Yeah. But we agree, though, we think we can extend this in the future without too much change, though, right? Or without too much pain on our part.
well, I mean, like the most simplistic thing, if you wanted to support chaining, is you would just make set not throw on second set, and you would just expose together.
Okay, great.
I mean, that would be.
So we have a plan for the future then, if need be.
All right. Well, it took half an hour.
No, it's fine.
It's better than the alternative. All right, so then I think we're good with this one, right? Da-da-da-da. All right. Thanks for coming by.
Excuse.
All right, Stephen, you said something about streams.
Scroll down. Not stream. Do async. The last one.
Ooh.
Oh,
All right.
yeah.
So we added this cancellation token optional parameter to get async enumerator. And the idea is that if you want to write a wait for each, you do a wait for each var item in source. And if you want to add a cancellation token, there's no language support for saying take this token and pass it into the get async enumerator method that the compiler generates. So we need an API that'll basically sort of funnel it through. And so we need some sort of .with cancellation. So you can say await for each var item in source .with cancellation token. That's sort of the general design that we agreed on with the C# language design team as well. If you scroll down a little bit,
Yep.
Emo.
As soon as I have my
It sounds like this is almost like configure await in spirit.
Well, that's what the main bulk of this issue is we now have
Configure cancel. Yeah. Okay.
we now have with cancellation and configure await that are dotable off of the enumerable.
Okay.
And so if you scroll down, we need to basically be able to combine them.
Okay.
And so previously, if you keep scrolling down, you go to the red-green. So previously, we'd approved adding configure await via basically an extension method on IAsyncEnumerable source that returns a configured async enumerable, like this, custom struct. But now we need one that also can accommodate cancellation. And so you need to be able to do like .configure await .with cancellation or .with cancellation .configure await, etc. Which really means you kind of need them. You kind of want them to both be operating on the same struct. So what I'm proposing is basically getting rid of the current one that we added. So I scroll down a little bit further, and having the single struct that's returned, both with cancellation and configure await both return it, and then that thing has instance methods as well that return another version of itself that's been configured appropriately. The upside of this is it allows you to say .WithCancellation, .configure await, .WithCancellation, .configure await, or .configure await, .WithCancellation. So you kind of get all possible combinations someone might want to write. We're not locking you in. The downside is it allows you to do something nonsensical like .WithCancellation, 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 which is just going to keep replacing the previous one that was included.
Yeah.
And we could choose to throw if we wanted in that situation. But I don't have a better solution in mind other than having multiple types to encode sort of the notion of which APIs you've already called.
Do we have other places in the framework where we use fluent syntax like this?
Link?
String builder, I guess.
Like configure await.
Well, like I wouldn't really say link is fluent syntax because it's returning. I guess this is returning a different object every time, isn't it? Or a different
Well, it's a
struct.
struct. I mean, we have string builder, right, which is effectively what you're
okay. I
talking
take that
about,
back. Yeah.
A little bit. We generally don't do it, but in this case, it's an extension. Like configure await's an existing method. And this is configure await the extension method.
Okay.
And this is tacking on the same paradigm that we have in the same object space. So it seems to fit.
So Stephen, like the with cancellation one that on configure await one that taken IAsyncEnumerable, they also handle the case when it was a configured cancelable IAsyncEnumerable that was cast to the interface, right?
No, that would be you'd be called the instance method on the struct.
Is this intentional that this one cannot be converted to an interface at all?
Yes. If you converted it to an interface, it wouldn't do what you wanted it to do. Like the configure await works because it returns something that's strongly typed that has a move next async that's strongly typed to return a configured value task awaitable. If you ended up casting this via the interface, your move next async would just return a value task, a bool, and then configure await wouldn't actually take have any effect because configure await works via pattern matching or a strongly typed pattern from the compiler, picking up the right configured value task awaitable and therefore picking up the right await pattern on that.
Oh, because I see. Because the cancellation is part of the of the for each, which gets lost at that point.
Because the cancellation token got moved to move next, right, Steve?
No, it's still on get async enumerator.
Okay.
But it's optional. And so in the case of this struct, we're not specifying it. The compiler will match as if no cancellation token was being passed in. So it'll match either a get async enumerator that's parameterless or a get async enumerator that takes an optional token. And in this case, because the only reason for using this whole API is that you've passed the cancellation token into with cancellation. We've defined get async enumerator here to be parameterless because you should never be calling this get async enumerator with a token.
Yeah, so effectively you never want an IAsyncEnumerable that is cancelable, right? Because you want this to be whoever is actually enumerating it to.
Right, this is purely about the call site for the await for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing, one of the highlights before we discuss further is I wanted to just briefly revisit. I don't have a strong opinion, but we previously put this onto task extensions, which is an existing class.
Right.
And maybe it'd be worth revisiting whether we actually want to do that or create a new class. The reasons why we would want to create something new are potentially minor. The main one being if we did want to enable someone, us or someone else, to release something, out of band, these extension methods would end up being on a different type. So, which if you're using extension syntax, doesn't matter at all. But if you were, using the full syntax, just the static method syntax, you'd have a change in your code. I think someone else raised the question of whether it's also kind of strange to be on task extensions for with cancellation because you're no longer like configure await. You kind of wave your hands and say, all right, well, it's about configuring the await on the task. But with cancellation really isn't about the task at all. It's just sort of about the general for eaching.
What namespace is IAsyncEnumerable in?
System collections generic.
Because it feels like these extension methods want to be in the same namespace.
It's quite possible.
Which makes them async enumerable extensions.
Yeah.
Actually, it's better than mine. Anyhow, something else to discuss. But if we're going to change it, we should change it at the same time. I'd be fine with async enumerable extensions.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm fine with that being in the other namespace because if you look at system collections generic, it has just to do with collections. This one really has to do with, cancellation and how you consume the asynchronous of it, which
I'm just going with, like, if somebody's writing their for each, like, yes, system threading tasks, I think, is in the default template from VS, but, like, if you are in a context where you don't have this use, like, is it reasonable to be doing async enumerable and not have a system threading tasks using? Because if so, then you get the fun. I'm writing this line of code it says in the sample. What do you mean you can't find it? Though I do think VS is better at, like, sniffing for missing usings now.
well, it definitely gives you. I mean, if you type it correctly, it will give you the right suggestion. The problem is still that you don't get the. Like if you don't know the name exactly, then you're still screwed. But the question is like, I mean, if you use the cancellation token, you clearly have a using for system.threading because that's where cancellation token is in. Configure await, I don't know. If you do configure await, are you likely to have a using for anything? Probably.
Although cancellation token is in system threading, not system threading tasks.
Fair enough. Although, like, yeah, I mean, I'm fine with putting in system threading. I wouldn't put it in system collection generic because that's relatively clean as a namespace.
Yeah.
And I would not put in some stuff that has to do with cancellation and configure await that does not seem to belong there at all. So I would either put it in system threading or system threading tasks. So I don't know. I mean, creating a new type seems a bit. I don't know. I mean, task extension might not be the best type to put it on, or the end of like what would we call the other one, like async enumerable extensions?
Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure
but in
that's-
general, don't we put the extensions type in the same namespace as the type it's extending?
We try to, but like the problem is that I think you also need to consider the namespace you put it in, right? Like if the namespace is already super clean and very small, like adding a type in there that is just a grabback for stuff seems wrong, right? And like if you look at enumerable, for example, enumerable is not in the same namespace as IAsyncEnumerable.
Right. Yeah.
And you are going to be using types from system threading tasks anyway as you write code which iterates over this, because presumably your method returns task.
Yeah, you're very likely to have it using.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fair. I mean, unless you're Steve and you know that you can write a custom await.
Yeah.
Even I don't generally go that far.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to be all that common, but you're right though.
Yes, because I was just thinking that in order to call it, you don't need it, but you could be.
In order to return something
In order to
useful.
have your method.
In order to use this API, you're writing an await for each, and in order to write an await for each, you're inside of an async enumerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but that's not returning a task. That's returning an async enumerable.
No, but
consuming it.
The method you're calling it from would be async, and unless you're async void, you're probably async task or async value task. So.
Or async, or you're an enumerable yourself.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm fine with whatever.
All right. So your preference is to leave it where it is.
Yeah, I mean, unless somebody has a brilliant idea, like it doesn't seem like. I think task extension is probably close enough.
Yeah, I think that it just comes back to Steve's question of if we think that we're oobing async enumerable, then this needs to be on a different type so it can oob with it. but we can always move that right before we ship.
That
Same with last roads, but yeah.
Okay, so leave those as is. I don't think I had any other questions. If you scroll down, did I say anything else below?
So, Steve, I noticed that there's a word cancelable here. Are we sure how many L's belong in it this time?
Yeah, so in general, we've never been 100% consistent, but since I've been involved, anything new we've been consistent on is that cancellation has 2 L's, everything else has 1.
Okay.
So cancel, canceled, cancelable all have 1 L, cancellation has 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that how English works, or is it just because we fucked it up for cancellation token?
That's how American English works.
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
Wiktionary calls 1 L the U.S. alternative spelling of 2 L's for cancelable.
Jesus Christ.
Which means it's the not preferred spelling according to Wiktionary. But,
And I think our framework design guideline says prefer the 1L version.
if only someone had a copy of the book right here. I knew where that stupid table was.
So I think, like, yeah.
Sorry, can you look at what Bart said? I forget what his question was.
I wonder if there would be a better.
The type as well. Okay, so you're just asking about
So what is the clash he's referring to?
I think he's referring to the fact that we're going to have an async enumerable for link, probably living not in core effects. It'll be in reactive somewhere. There'll be async enumerable .select and async enumerable .where. So ideally we might create a type called async enumerable that has configure await and what on it, but we're not planning to define all the various link methods, and those would probably be on an async enumerable type.
Right. Yeah, given that this is an ever-growing list of things, that's a great candidate for for later, or maybe never. All right, then it seems like we.
So other than that, were there any other thoughts on the APIs about how to any other changes to them? I'd love to get this done this week if possible. I'd love to get it in too.
I heard the argument about that it's nonsensical to chain them in various ways. I agree with that. That's unfortunate, but we have this in many other areas. Pretty much anything that's fluent, you can always chain it in weird ways, right? Or any instance method that returns itself. But I mean, my canonical example is toString on string, where you can toString it 4 times, and it's nonsensical, but also there's nothing that prevents that. And
is there any? I could go either way on this. From a design perspective, is there any benefit to detecting that you've done something nonsensical and throwing, or we don't care? You can imagine the struct storing whether it is whether with cancellation has been used and whether the configure await has been used, and if it's true and you call that same method throw. Well, do we care? Just overwrite.
What's the behavior that I would get? I would assume the last one would win, right?
Last one would win.
Yeah, which seems kind of what you would expect. I can actually see this being useful in debugging, right? When you just want to add something quickly to the end to override something you did earlier, and then you just remove it.
Maybe. I mean, if it was returning a thing that could be, sent back to the interface, then I would say it definitely should prevent the oops behavior. But the fact that this pulls you out of interface land and pretty much locks you into the for each statement now means you literally wrote it twice on the same line, or you understood that you had a configured cancelable async enumerable. The only exception would be if you varred it, and I have opinions about var.
Well, it's not all that different than, say that you have an options object where you set the cancellation token property twice. We're not ever going to stop that, right? The last one you set just overrides the first one. Yeah.
I totally buy that.
Yeah. That's true, actually. If you can you can just interpret them as assignments.
Yeah, so the only question I would have for you, Steve, is do you think it's common enough to want to set both that you should have an accelerator for it?
Yes. Oh, I mean, do we need a combined configure await and cancellation?
What would you call that?
Is your struct big enough that it's worth avoiding the second copy?
We can probably fix that.
I doubt it. Given that you're about to do an await for each,
Okay. The question has been asked and answered. We can move on. Yeah.
And honestly, if it shows up, like we can address that at chat.
Indeed.
But just humor me. How would you name that method?
Figure await, probably.
Yeah, just configure await with
Configure
an
await.
overload.
Yeah, with an optional cancellation token.
I actually don't think we should do that.
Nope. Okay.
And the reason is we've always talked about, like, what if you wanted to, if you were awaiting a task and you wanted to cancel, you at that point you can't control how the task is operating, but you could choose to cancel the wait operation. You can call .wait cancellation token today, which cancels the wait, not the thing you're waiting. So if you imagine we wanted to be able to do a wait task, in the past we've always talked about that as doing await task.configure await cancellation token. In which case the cancellation token is about, because you're configuring the await to be cancelable.
Right.
But here, that's not at all what the cancellation token would mean.
I see. So you're actually flowing it through to the operation.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. That's fair.
Booyah. No, I have to do work, unfortunately, as well. Alright, so we have handled that one.
JSON document.
It's an awesome tool.
Why the heck does it always land in the wrong browser though? That is annoying.
I totally think we should do JSON document, but I just want to make sure, are there any others that we need to do in this time? Because presumably this one's going to take the rest of it.
Not that I know of. Let me just remember the
Is there any low-hanging fruit?
Famous last words.
Indeed. Do you care about this one, Stephen? Or is that?
I care about it for, the async disposable one?
This one, the IAsyncEnumerable for channel.
Oh, I care about both that one and the one two below it for 3.0, but they're not pressing. So I'd rather we do JSON document, which is pressing.
Yeah. I think there's nothing else that... you should probably do this one here really quick because it's a small one and it's from the WinForms guys. And it should be a fast one.
No, the bottom one, thumbs up.
Yeah, the bottom one seems like hopefully that's fast.
Okay, then let's maybe do these two. Alright, so basically text boxes get this thing here where you can enter your name, and then you, as soon as you focus it, or as soon as there's text inside it, what they call the placeholder text disappears, right? And so all they need to do is basically expose a property on TextBox that says what do you want the text to be, right? And that's the proposal. And
Ship it.
like,
I thought we already had that actually.
no, baby,
Is it?
WPF
Is
has
the-
everything.
Does it not have placeholder text at all today, or it's just hard coded?
No, it doesn't exist today. It's literally like custom drawn. That's the feature.
Huh. Maybe it is only on WPF then.
But it's a very common thing that almost all modern things have, except WinForms never had it.
And I guess the only question would be, is it named the same thing as in?
Yes, is placeholder. I think it's a great thing to add. The question is placeholder the right term, and are there other kind of text things on TextBox or other APIs that that sort of follows the same naming pattern?
So WinRT has it, and they call it placeholder text.
Okay.
But you said you think WPF has it?
Like I thought I've seen it before. It might be WinRT actually.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I don't see it in WPF, which is okay.
I see WinForms data grid view placeholder cell style and placeholder string format, but I don't see placeholders.
If you search for placeholder text, it comes up with a ton of Stack Overflow results for exactly this. So.
So yeah, seems good.
Yeah, and in HTML it's called placeholder, so yeah, the name is good.
Yeah, I think there was some discussion originally. They called it null text, but that was not something anybody liked.
Yeah. Placeholder text seems
placeholder is
good.
All right, then that was an easy one.
Look, we actually have
Yay!
easy ones.
Oh, should it return empty string or null by default?
I
That's an
think they
implementation
clarified that somewhere.
It's not an
Well,
implementation detail; it has to be documented, which means it's part of the API design. Probably null if it's not set.
The native API calls it the set queue banner.
Of course, because it's the most intuitive name. I swear to God, I've seen this.
Well, I'm trying to see what the native API actually does for the default, if anything. Because I imagine that's just what the default behavior should be, whatever.
I mean, what is text return when there's no text?
There's
Presumably
always
it
text in the
returns
text box by definition.
So then presumably there's always placeholder text as well? I mean, presumably it would turn empty?
I would probably make it return empty because nulls are usually the thing that kills more stuff, and I mean empty seems fine. But if there's no placeholder text,
Well, I mean but then that means that we should throw an argument. Either we're doing argument null exception or normalizing if you set null.
I think WinForms mostly does normalizing.
Yeah.
Like if you set, I think it's even legal to say textbox.text equals null, and then it just does an empty string. Relatively sure.
If only the code for Windows Forms were available somewhere to check.
WinForms TextBox text normalizes to empty on return. It accepts null as input.
Okay.
And it
we'll do
stores
the
it as
same.
null?
When the return is return s equal null question mark empty other or
Okay.
else.
Okay, so it's unobservable.
That's how we do this.
So they have a pattern. They never return null, and they accept null because they're nice like that.
This ASP.NET works the same way, then, like when web forms works the same way. Yeah.
And the Win32 API docs don't say anything about what the default value is or
Yeah.
whether it throws on null. So
Presumably, you're not calling the API and passing a null as a parameter.
well, I mean, it's
Maybe, like-
it's a Win32 API, so
That's
I would
not-
completely expect that they support
Uh,
null.
No, yeah, sure.
Oh, is it Win32 API? No, because they'll just say like if something goes wrong, call get last error.
Yeah.
Like
And then you get like E argument or whatever.
Yeah. like ebad arg.
Yeah. Well, in this case, there is no get last error. It's it returns true or false based on whether it succeeded, and nothing else.
False isn't get last error.
No, because it goes through. It's part of the dispatch message pump.
All right,
Okay,
Steven,
perfect.
you want a concat version that takes read-only-span of char and
Yeah.
few
Ship
overloads.
Yep.
Cool.
Seems
Why did you
reasonable.
stop it for? Okay, that's a good reason. Ship it.
Great.
Well, I think that the original, like the C#2 language specification, called out up to 4.
Yeah. And they are called stir0, stir1,
And then
stir2, yeah. Okay.
I remember when writing the script compiler that I got really annoyed that CSC went up to like 6 and it blind called it. It didn't ask if the framework supported it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
CSC, you just violated the language spec. So then I added more overloads. But yeah, I mean, we can add more when we need them, and we certainly can't add the params because we can't box the span. So
Yep. And this seems straightforward.
and this is only for straight calls. You don't we don't expect the compiler team to be adding plus on read-only-span of char, right?
Correct.
Hope
Yeah.
not.
All right, sounds good.
We can never do a span of span, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Maybe in
At least
some
not
future
today.
version we can have an equivalent.
Of what? Span of span?
Whatever like a variadic equivalent of span looks like.
Well, I mean, right now you can't have a span of span because span can't be a generic parameter
Right.
or argument to it. I need to look at the language definition.
I mean, like, it would be super nice if we could have a params that is basically span based.
Yeah.
And then at that point you're screwed here because there's no way you can represent that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes, I do wish that the language would add the params
Span.
span,
Yeah.
and then And then I think Jan sort of wants to add span of this span. Let span be a generic argument when it's reasonable and safe to do so. I think the problem is they're having trouble deciding what that means.
Yeah.
Which is why it hasn't happened yet.
Well, this is fine though.
So yeah, this is a good start.
All right. Random access model for JSON. I feel like I've looked at this before.
You have?
Did we actually approve the previous one?
No.
No, I mean, did we mark the string and cat as approved?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I just didn't see that. Okay.
Okay, so the differences from last time.
Just a thing that's
So if we start up at the JSON document part, which you just scrolled off the top, there's now a parse that takes a sequence. Yeah, so I added sequence of byte. In this API proposal, and so this is contrasting a little bit with what Aslan has as the PR right now in JSON Writer. I use UTF-8 as a prefix when we're talking about bytes because encoding and bytes go together, and I do not use a prefix when we're talking about char because that's a concept type.
Sure.
So added read-only sequence of byte for Christoph's scenarios. And yeah, so that's the only change at JSON document.
And JSON document's still immutable?
It's still only self-mutable.
Right.
Self-mutable?
Well, it holds some buffers and stuff. When you dispose it, it returns all the stuff to the array pool.
Oh yeah, but but if
a caller cannot change the DOM. So the DOM is fixed.
got it. Okay.
And then the type is, yeah. So it's still a read-only representation. It just holds its state for stuff. Yeah. In the JSON element, the string-based property indexers are gone. They're now just a method. This was because when I was talking about something with Emo, he got upset that the property indexer was an order in times in being the number of properties times m being the number of characters in the string you're looking up operation. And so it moved to a method to make it be more obvious that it's medium expensive instead of light expensive.
Can I go back to JSON document for a second and just ask another question?
Okay.
So I previously questioned the iDisposable, and I just want to question it one more time, and then we can move on.
Okay.
So I have two questions about it. One is, other places in the framework where we have XX document, they're not iDisposable, and so I'm a little concerned that we sort of established that you don't need to be concerned about disposing these things. But I could get over that. Like I could see the argument being made, well, this is just a new thing and people will have to learn. The second thing, though, is I'm a little concerned. This is iDisposable because we're pulling arrays out of the pool, right?
Yep.
That's the reason this is iDisposable?
Yes. All the dispose does is return them back to the pool.
So I'm a little concerned that this might become, for some usage scenarios, this might become a resource hog and might, you might create a long-lived JSON document and it's just going to hold on to arrays from the pool for a indeterminate amount of time. Is that a valid concern, or am I just making trouble?
I mean, so unless I misunderstand how the array pool works, all that would mean is that the next call to array pool rent has to allocate a new array, which then has to slowly cycle its way into Gen 2. But that's just true of any parallel load factor. And eventually, when you're done with this and you dispose it, it goes back in, and now there's just an extra Gen 2 buffer in the array. Or in the pool.
Yeah, unless at that point you've already filled up the array pool again, and so it'll dump the Gen 2 buffer.
Yeah, but I don't like the expected scenarios where we've seen people use this. It's they want a lighter version than deserialize on reading a payload. They read it short. They're holding it like less than a half a second, and then it's done.
Okay, so it's like you would expect this to be per request, not cached in any way.
Yeah.
Okay.
based on the existing usages that we've seen from JSON.NET. It's mostly just people use it. They want a quick. I'm looking for this sort of JPath type thing, and now I've read it and I'm done with the document. Get rid of it.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like a reader except more convenient.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah, I'm actually using now because we don't have the document. I'm using reader to parse some Azure payloads.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's really bad.
No, it's not bad. It's just not intended for your particular scenario because
Well,
it's a
it
very
has-
low level type.
Yeah, it's not that the API is bad. It's just the model where you have to have your own state machine and track what you just read and what you're gonna be still reading. It's just-
Okay, so then the in JSON element, the type is no longer the JSON token type. It's now a new thing called JSON value type, which is a copy of JSON token type without end array and end object, and start array and start object are just called array and object.
Okay, great.
So there's the new enum for telling you what you're at. Enumerate object and enumerate array now return different enumerators. Or enumeratorables. And
and you have the exception types defined too. Good. Okay.
So why do we have JSON document and then you have to do root element? Why JSON document is not the root element?
I mean, we could copy absolutely every member off of the elements down to the document, but that seems...
What is the purpose of the JSON document type then? Why parse doesn't return the root element?
Because it returns the thing that you put in a using statement, so when you're done, all the buffers go back to the array pool.
And root element wouldn't...
All elements point back to the document that owns them. The document is the only thing that knows what's on. Element is just a cursor. And so element is what holds the parse, well, it's not a parse tree because it's a parse flat. Element is what holds, document is what holds everything. Element only has one or two fields. One is what's the document I came from, and number two is what's my position ID.
Yeah. XML document has a somewhat similar pattern, by the way. Like you get the root element from the document, and then you iterate off of that.
Yeah. So the document's one thing, and then elements within it are another. Right?
Well, to be very clear that people should never do JSON document.parse.root element.
I mean, they can. That just stole from the array pool.
I mean, we could just have a like a code analyzer rule or something that says, this is an inefficient way of calling this.
You call the method that returned a disposable, and then you didn't dispose it. We already have one for that.
Okay, yes, you're right. Okay.
All right, you want to scroll in?
I do not.
Okay. Would you any?
I need to find my mouse again. Hey.
All right. I added single because that came up last time. I also added uint32 in addition to uint64 because that came up last time. The try get values all got expanded to value got replaced with the name of the type. So it's getInt32 and try getInt32. Scroll. So the previous enumerator is now array enumerator. Nothing fancy about it. Now it conforms to the interfaces, so it can be linked, I guess. Scroll. Object enumerator returns it enumerates over this new structure, which is JSON property. Property has
Scroll down a little bit more.
two properties. One is the element that is the value, and the other is a string that is the name. The structure itself is read-only. As an implementation detail for those who care, name is delay. The name property just calls into the document and says, give me what the name is. So it can use a delay unescaped but still cached value.
Okay.
Because originally I had it as a memoized property, but that meant I couldn't have a read-only struct, and then I kicked it to be a read-only struct.
Are you overriding to string on all these types?
Element overrides toString.
What does it return?
The correct thing.
Well, I mean, what does, like, if my element represents an object, does it return like open curly?
It returns from
stuff?
the open curly to the closed curly without applying escaping.
Okay.
In that, following framework design guidelines, you should never depend on the value of toString. It's only intended for debugging.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, JSON property doesn't override, but it could be useful, correct?
It does not override it because I don't know. I mean, if someone wants to define what we think a good toString is for a property, we could add it, but
I would say name colon value, that toString.
So everything except for the outer curly, basically. Yeah.
What's the outer curly?
Within an object, like you have open brace.
Yeah, I mean, I could do the same thing I do.
Well,
for,
if an object has multiple properties, one property is
okay,
just this
yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
I mean, so so.
And by the way, the reason I'm asking for it is, again, I'm using now JSON Reader, and I already send lots of feedback to Ason for things not overriding to string and not being able to even tell what state they are.
But this is just for debugging, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we could say that it does similar to what object does. If it finds where did the quote that started this start out to, where is the thing, or where is the value end, and it's just like, here's the raw string dump, party on. And that's fine. Yeah, so there's JSON value type, which is, as I said, it's the JSON token type without the ends, and the word starts are removed.
So I noticed that you have JSON writer that writes element. Would it make sense to add one that writes property?
We could. It's really just an accelerator for write element property.name, comma property.value.
The property.name transcodes perhaps back and forth. So it would, in theory, be somewhat of an optimization.
Yes.
It depends on as soon as our API representation is, you say that we will always write the \u version of a quote. That means that we're always re-escaping, which means that we have to do the work anyway. So
no, doesn't JSON properties track hold to the actual payload?
It does, but if we guarantee that we're writing out escape strings using a particular escaping format, then we can't write. We can't blit. We have to.
Oh, you would have to check whether it's already escaped.
I would be willing to bend on that a little bit, but
I'm just you're the one who cares about the way that we quotes.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, I mean that's fine to add.
So another thing,
which I guess would be write element JSON property, because it contains the name and the value. It would be weird because it would be the only thing in that type that doesn't have value, that doesn't take a property name.
So element can be very, very large, because element can be an object with an array inside and stuff like this.
Yep.
What happens if it doesn't fit when you write it?
What do you mean it doesn't fit?
Output buffer's too small, you mean?
Yeah, so it writes to the JSON writer, and JSON writer currently is a buffer writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Buffer writer doesn't have. You can get new buffers.
Yes.
What happens if I try to write a gig?
So I spoke with Asan about this. He does have a limitation on how large any individual incoming string can be. And the reason for that is because he pessimistically computes the maximum length that string will expand into after escaping. and then does a bunch of work under the covers
Yeah.
to make sure that the iBuffer writer can actually give him a properly sized span. So it should work, unless you have unless you're trying to write a gigabyte long string, it should work.
Well, not gigabyte long string. So I think this is almost a problem that we should kind of discuss in a larger group,
Okay.
which is if I'm using JSON writer directly and I'm writing, property by property, from time to time I would flash the actual stream.
Mm-hmm.
Well, flash async is not on iBuffer writer; it's on pipe writer. So now we are introducing a bunch of APIs that potentially can write massive amounts of data, yet I have no way to flash async periodically between, every 100 megabytes when I'm writing 1 gigabyte JSON. Or not even, you should be flashing more frequently than once every 100 megabytes.
But this assumes that you have already built up in memory an element, a single element, that corresponds to 100 megabytes of JSON, correct?
Yeah.
Is that realistic?
Well, I mean, what about the case where you're parsing a file, and then you're just going to rewrite it to normalize all the text to be either minified or pretty print or something like that?
That, to me, sounds like there are features missing in iBuffer writing.
Well, so I kind of agree. That's what I said. It's this whole thing that PipeWriter has flash async. It's exactly for this reason. It's basically periodically you're supposed to call it after writing some amount of data, and then you can get more buffers, write to them, advance them, and then flash async.
Yeah.
Well, now we are introducing APIs that are kind of high-level APIs that potentially can write large amount of data. They should be flashing async from time to time, but it's not weaved in. There's no way to do it.
Well, I mean, and then that would mean that these need to be async because
Correct.
they need to flush async. But we could. I mean, so we could also drop this entirely because one of the things we talked about was how it was going to be so great because we passed this in and it still has a pointer back to what the raw text was and it can just copy it. The problem is if we care about the way that we're escaping, if we care about the representation of escaped values, we don't get to do that. And at which point this just becomes...
That's why I said I'm willing to bend on that, because I was talking about the initial escaping of the value. If you have an incoming payload, the data's already escaped because the verifier checks out. So it can just go right out to the output.
Yes, but we don't know. It could have /quote instead of /u, whatever the right number is.
I will be okay with that.
Okay. So, let me... I would not want my comment to cause removal of these things. I think they are super useful.
Yeah.
I do think that we should spend some time thinking what to do with this flash async and pipelines and the iBuffer writer. It's a thing that kind of we hand wave a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe JSON writer is just not the right. Maybe JSON writer, just like JSON reader, is very, very low level, and JSON document deserves something higher level as far as writing goes to be its complement.
Which would be all the APIs off of JSON writer, but with the word async at the end of them?
No. I don't really know what it would look like, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it's for Ason, actually, not for this review.
Yeah. And
where is he, by the way?
Probably responding to the 300 comments on the JSON writer PR.
Buried under an avalanche of work.
I'm fine with whatever. I think having seen the writer today, these are also missing the skip escaping or whatever the name of the optional parameter that should be at the end of them is.
Yeah.
But,
okay.
So the only thing that I can think of that was in the last review that I said no on, which I think I have edit text above this. You'd think that I would have been sane and actually opened my own thing right now. But, is James had suggested that he wanted an API that returns nullable int. The problem is nowhere in the framework do we have a method that has the word nullable in it, and we've already have used getInt32 to be a non-nullable int32, and I don't think that nullable would be the default that we would want. So I said no. Unless Christoph right now wants to decide that we can have getInt32 and getNullable int32.
So basically, the behavior that James was proposing is you index into a property, and if the property doesn't exist, it returns null.
He wanted the notion that a property is either a number or null, or sorry, that an element is either a number or null, and then because what he does is he has conversion operators with no named alternatives. So he has a cast to int and a cast to nullable int, and you just use whichever one you wanted, and you get the thing. But following the guideline that any conversion operator should also have a method that is the same thing as the conversion operator, well, what do we call that method? Do we actually write the word nullable as nullable? And we have never done that.
So today, when Imo, if you could scroll to the method that we are talking about, if you call getInt32 and pass property name, you throw if it doesn't exist. No.
So which one?
No.
So getInt32, you already have an element.
Yes.
And the element type, if it is null, getInt32 throws of I'm not a number.
Yes. Well, you called wrong APIs. You should fix your program. There's no reason to get nullable.
Right. So James is indicating that he thinks that this should have had a notion that this is either an int or a nullable int in this position in your DOM.
Why?
Right. And I think that if he wants that as an extension method, he can write it.
I can imagine something like try_get property where you pass a name.
Yeah.
I can imagine those.
No, his argument is, when I remember what James said, he said, like, in JSON, null is often used in the context of the value is absent, because you're serializing, for example, database structures or other things. And the problem in practice is if we give you these two APIs, try_get property and whatever, that makes that use case slightly more cumbersome to use. And he added the APIs because...
No, but to be able to call any of these methods, this one,
yes,
I need to know what the type of the value is.
Yes.
Yeah, he's just saying there's another overload that is like getNullable int32. Because you expect it to be.
But why would I not call if JSON value type equals null, then do whatever you want to do?
No, because the consumer basically eventually wants to get a nullable int.
Right. So it's James's scenario is you have in your class, in your C# class, you have a nullable int.
Yeah.
In order to read this, you have to write the if the type is null yourself, and I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, me too. Because I don't. Well, if it was very convenient for us to add the helper directly, sure we should do it. But I don't know how it would even look. We would have to basically not have get int64 return int64. It would have to return nullable.
No, it would be a different method.
Or we have
copy paste and insert
get
nullable.
int64 and get nullable int64.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
By the way,
my argument is we've never added the word nullable.
Then
in that.
extension methods work super well for it.
So I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but operators, like explicit cast operators from JSON element to the primitive types. Like
Hey, Christoph, what's our rule on when we should add explicit operators?
like cast JSON element to int, for instance, and it would be the equivalent of getInt32.
Right. So here's the evolution of how we got to here.
Yeah.
JSON.NET has conversion operators with no named methods.
Yeah.
So Ason had conversion operators with no named methods in the prototype.
Yeah.
When I was moving it into CoreFX, I followed the guideline that says if you have a conversion operator, you need to have a named alternative to the conversion operator. Steve asked why I have both, so I deleted the conversion operators.
So my view on this is that those conversion operators are very cute, but they are not visible in IntelliSense, and in the end, people don't know how to use the APIs.
Okay.
They get the element and they like, how the heck do I get now an int?
Yeah.
And they don't see int methods. They see get value that returns a string. They call it, and then they parse the int, and then it's everything super slow.
Okay. So if we get a bunch of feedback later that people really, really want them, we can consider them. But I think right now, smaller is better.
That's totally fine.
Yeah, I would be totally fine with adding the operators in addition to the get methods for people who know and like cute code.
In the future, if people demand it.
Either today or in the future.
Yeah. Okay. And if I did, all that they would do is they would just, again, following what's written in the book, they would just call it an alternative, which means that they are pure syntactic sugar.
That's totally fine. Okay.
And
can I get value as object, and basically you're gonna box whatever is the right type.
You can write an extension method that
was
switches on what the type is.
Following your earlier suggestion, that seems like a perfect.
What would be the scenario for that?
For example, if I want to write a dynamic DOM on top of it, it basically would do what it needs to do.
I mean, again, we can add it later. It's an easy extension method. It's
Use JavaScript.
Why doesn't this implement like iDynamic object or whatever it is?
We have a wrapper that actually does that.
Okay.
The only problem I have with it is that our dynamic APIs are not so.
Because our dynamic APIs were meant for COM invocation.
Yes.
Are you saying our dynamic feature is very heavyweight and not very performance?
Wasn't this the goal of the DLR to basically make it not just for COM?
Basically, yes. But like you implement the dynamic type system or static type system, so it's not going to be amazingly fast, right?
But it's like amazingly slow. It would be good if it was in the middle.
It looks fine.
Yeah. So, and then the only other thing that I wrote down that was a no based on last feedback is Emo had asked for the property indexer to return a nullable, but the operator didn't lift, and then that's when we had the discussion of the property actually wasn't cheap, so now it's a method instead of a property. Sorry, indexer. Yeah. I'm looking at the word get property, and so I said property.
Yes.
Hey, Jeremy, the one we had a discussion with reader, maybe with writer around big integer. If I had an element that contained data that was too large to fit in a long, for example, but I still wanted to use JSON document, how would I create my own big integer? Is there like a get span or something that I would use to then pass to big integer parse or something? How does that work?
We cut get span during the last review because it was the only thing that cared what the encoding of the input data was.
Okay, so like get like an integer out longer than long.max value?
Well, if you really want to, and you're willing to ignore the advice in framework design guidelines, you can call toString, which will give you the number text, and then you can just parse that as a big integer.
Is there any reason why we don't have a inner text property like we do on XML element?
First of all, it wouldn't be a property because it's going to be hellaciously expensive, and because it's hellaciously expensive.
Yeah.
What's the type?
String.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, literally just have a method, not a property. Have a method called getInnerText. It transcodes to string. If you want the raw text, there you go. Like you're taking the perfet for it.
Okay. Well, toString is it?
But the question is like, so is that transcode no unescape? Is that transcode unescape? Like, we have to decide.
Well,
raw text, so it would be unescaped.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, it would be escaped as it came in, just transcoded.
Yeah. So apply the encoding transform from whatever it was, aka UTF-8 because it's all we accept right now, to be a string.
Yep.
We can add it. It makes sense on element. I don't know that it makes sense on property. I mean, that's what property toString is actually going to be, but it doesn't really make sense for like property. Give me your text.
If you want people not to take a dependency on property.toString, you could always just add a debugger display attribute. I'm going to go slink under the table now.
Okay.
So when is this feature available for people who want portable APIs?
That is up to Emo, and I'll say Jock, because you don't report to him anymore.
Because I really want to remove my usage of JSON reader, because nobody can grok what code I wrote. It's just horrible. Like literally to parse a small structure that has like 10 fields,
Yeah.
it's like hundreds of lines of code.
So I think that this is going to be in the same situation as the reader. So if we're sharing the reader as source, then this will be a source as well.
Yeah, and when will I have it?
I need 2 things from Asan, which he says that he will get to this week, and then I will open the PR. Or in fact, I might open the PR blocked on those 2 bugs.
Awesome.
So that's, yeah, this is, everything is implemented, everything is ready, except it gives you illegally formed strings because we don't have unescaping, and it depends on me having half fixed a bug in the reader that I want Asan to fix for me.
And also another thing is, I asked Asan this question in email yesterday, but he's not replying, and that's why I asked.
He's buried under work. Yeah.
So lots of data comes as streams, but your new APIs take either spans or read-only sequences. Are you guys gonna ship an adapter?
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
If anyone knows the plan for sequence and stream, it would be you. Are we having a generic transformation of one to the other?
So I had pushed for us to have just easy stream support, but was told no. So the next best thing is one of the issues that showed up on Emo's list that we skipped over was from David about creating an adapter between streams and pipelines. And there's pipelines to sequence, so you'd go stream to pipeline to sequence, with obviously some boilerplate in there to do the whole get the next sequence from the pipeline. That's the only thing that I'm aware of. I've pushed Josh and Asan on this, but I've been told it's not a priority.
So is your question, Christoph, or is your assertion that we should add JSON document.parse of stream, which reads to the end of the stream?
Is that the one you're talking about, Steven?
Either this one or an adapter that I like. You know, there's one question what I need and what the majority of our developers. I don't care whether it's a helper that takes a stream or it's an adapter.
Right.
But I need one of those, otherwise, again, I'm writing lots of like BCL libraries to be able to parse JSON.
Right, but if we don't think that we're going to get an easy form of this, then presumably your question would be, or your suggestion would be that we add JSON document parse that takes stream.
Yeah,
I think that would actually make sense, although it would probably need to be an async method.
Yeah.
The reason I'd heard, we're not going to do it for JSON reader writer is this is low level, and as such, we're using ref structs and all that kind of stuff. And so I could kind of get, okay, well, you would need something higher level. But JSON document is already higher level, and I don't believe there's any reason, since it's already pulling everything into memory anyway, and it would just be a single method that goes from stream to JSON document. I don't see anything stopping us from doing that, and it's a good idea.
Agree.
Okay, so parse async that takes stream, and then I think...
And cancellation token.
Yep. And then do we also want the synchronous method? Because I think that in the ASP.NET's suggested updates to our async guidances, if you have an async, also have a sync so that people don't do sync over async.
Yeah, so we need to work on the async guidance because, I don't know, I mean, we have... There are lots of people who push for always having synchronous version for asynchronous APIs, but I'm not sure how much sense it makes for like true I/O operations.
Can we go back to the parse method real fast? The parse method has overloads to take read-only-span of bytes, right?
Yep.
Okay. That would probably... The reason I'm asking is historically it's been very common for people to take like a byte array, wrap it inside a memory stream, and then pass it to an API that takes a stream as an input. That would be an example of where you would want a sync equivalent, but here just pass the byte array in directly. So we would have to get people used to calling this overload instead of wrapping stuff and then calling a new overload.
With one thing that popped in my head, and we can go back to what Levi was just saying, but Levi's thing made me think of it. If we take a stream, we probably also need to take an encoding.
Yeah, I was going to say we either need to take a stream and say it's
UTF-8.
or instead of taking the stream, we take a text reader.
Yeah.
But then that means that it's always transcoded.
Yeah, let's not take.
Okay. Stream and encoding.
And I mean, I can do a quick test of if is UTF-8 encoding, great, drain it to the byte array.
Yeah, why not just stream without encoding and basically say it has to be UTF-8 data? I mean, we don't take encoding for read-only memory, and you could do the same thing.
I mean, we could call it stream UTF-8 stream, and because in the ones that take bytes, we've said in the parameter name, I am UTF-8. Like I've told you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
UTF-8 in this.
Yeah, my point is basically it's equivalent to this method that takes read-only memory, and we don't take encoding and re-encode and transcode on the fly.
Okay.
We basically tell you this is the expectation. If you have something else, well.
Okay. But once we're
I can see that. Yeah.
Once we're adding stream, should we also add text reader, which would solve the I have text and an encoding and built-in stuff?
I think the problem is with text reader that then text reader doesn't let you do what this thing needs to do, which is read bytes, UTF-8 bytes, so we can pass it to JSON reader.
That's. I mean, I'm just asking what scenarios we think we might have, because like if you wanted to connect it to like console.in, right? Like I'm going to input JSON stuff. That's a text reader. It's getting UTF-16.
Yeah.
UTF-8.
So maybe it would be useful. I'm saying I don't know how you would actually implement it.
Oh, it would drain into the char one.
Yeah.
Oh, it would drain reader read all text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all the stream one's going to do.
It would have it would have, I think, surprising performance characteristics, which is why I'm nervous about just adding it as an overload.
Because I mean, again, that's what the stream one's going to do.
Yeah.
At least until we have reason that we need to do something different. Even if it's async, it's just going to keep async draining into progressively larger rented buffers until it decides what size it actually needed, and then it gives you the document.
No, that's a good point.
No, not progressively large buffer. You're not going to resize the buffer. Are you going to try to get it into a single buffer? Oh, this drains. This drains the read-only sequence as well?
The current implementation does, yes.
Oh, I see.
The API shape says that we can expand the type to have better support for sequence in the future, but right now we don't have a use case justifying complicating the implementation.
Yeah. Interesting.
But again, like because we're doing API review, right? And part of API review is future-proofing this. Is it possible that we could add such APIs, such overloads in the future without destroying this type?
So the absolute easiest answer is because JSON element opaquely hides what its document is. I can internally virtualize the entire parse structure of things. And if you gave me a sequence, I give you back a different object that understands dynamic paging between things. I can internally virtualize the whole thing.
So you want
the API shape.
So you want a private constructor on JSON document then, which isn't reflected here, but yeah.
I have a private. Yes, apparently I wrote this one by hand instead of copying it out of the file. So I'll double check that. But yes, the type. Because you can't change it once it's built, it makes no sense anyway. Even if you did activate or create instance, one root element's just going to throw I think I'm disposed exception.
Sounds good. Because that way we can also, if we need to in the future, unseal this, just make it abstract and still give it an internal constructor or something.
Yeah.
Easy.
Anyway, I would start simple by just adding an overload that takes a stream and call it UTF-8.
Okay.
We do have all the other complications that come with taking streams. Like, do we also have a bool leave open and that sort of thing?
I mean,
there's no. It doesn't make sense for it to have this leave open because it basically consumes the whole stream, stores the data. So you pass the stream, you may do whatever you want with it.
The only difference would be if it's a memory stream, I would drain it to the end of the current stream, and then you could write more into it later.
But if it's a memory stream, like call one of the other overloads instead.
Well, I have a question. With the existing overloads of like parse that takes a read-only memory, what happens if the UTF-8 JSON contains 2 documents, one after the other?
It throws.
It throws?
Because
Okay.
it is not a legal document.
Okay.
Oh, really? So I have to pre-parse it first.
So that's what I was asking. It's like, on the one hand, you get that reaction, oh, I have to pre-parse it first. And then if we switch to saying, no, you don't, we're just going to represent the first one. Well, then with a stream, you kind of do want to leave open because you might have a stream that contains multiple documents.
Well, but you can't unread a stream. So if we found in the middle of a read segment that you...
What do you mean you can't unread a stream? You can seek back to 0.
Assuming that the stream supports seeking.
Yeah, but some do.
Some network stream doesn't.
Network doesn't, but some do.
Yeah, but like all the file ones do. So if you already have a JSON file on disk and you want to create both a pretty and a minified version of it, why read it twice when you can read it once, seek back to 0, and then do it again?
Well, I mean, fair.
Yeah, so, but by the way, the reading...
I guess the easy answer is nothing that ever disposes the stream ever should have disposed the stream. Especially this shouldn't because it's a method and not a constructor, which means our convention is it would not put it in the using statement. So it does not need leave open because it won't close it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, the thing that I would change, now that you said that, I think the methods should basically parse till they find the closing brace and then return how many bytes they parsed from memory.
So
Otherwise, I'm not sure if
UTF-8 parser does.
Exactly. Because otherwise, what happens if there's some like trailing white space?
Trailing white space is legal.
What about if
trailing
there's
free is not?
What if there's something else in the memory?
Then it goes.
Well, then that means I always have to kind of parse it before I pass it to you.
Right, you have to believe that what you have sent me is a JSON document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can do that. We can add out types consumed.
Yeah.
Where types is chars on.
Also, why is it not try parse?
Why would it be?
Yeah.
Because what if it's not, not parsable?
If it's not
Then it
JSON,
throws?
why are you calling this API if you have reason to suspect it's not a JSON document?
I don't know. I got it
Because
from
the user
somebody.
gave you a .json
Yeah.
file from disk and it wasn't valid JSON
Yeah.
because they forgot a something somewhere.
Sure,
Okay.
then it's invalid, so you throw.
Yeah. What's your implementation of false? It's probably throw.
Well, we have. So why do we have try parse on int and not on this one?
Why do we have int32.tryparse?
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is because for performance reasons, we wanted to be able to tell if a value coming in, such as coming over the network or something, was something that we could very easily throw an error for or report an error for.
So here the argument would be, this is so expensive that we don't care about the cost of the exception. Is that the case?
Kind of
Pretty
what I would
much.
say,
Yeah. And if you absolutely need to have your exception rate counter say 0, you can use JSON Reader.
If
I would
you
also
need to
say-
have your exception counter say 0, you shouldn't be using a managed language.
I would also say, like, if you get an exception and says, string is not a valid int, it's probably easy to tell why it's not a valid int. If you have an error in the entire document and says this document is not valid JSON, you're like, motherfucker, where is the problem? Like, it's a 1,000 line document where did I miss my semicolon, right? So false is not going to be super useful, I think.
That said, the exception that we throw, I believe, does contain information about where the error was, right?
I just throw whatever exception I need it
Okay, then yeah, it'll contain that information.
to. It'll tell you where it was when it failed.
Yeah.
All right. So if we want it to parse the first one and be consuming, does that mean that we want to add the outs, or do we want to overload add the outs?
I'm still not sold that we wanted to parse the first one and then leave everything else there, because our other DOM representations don't do that in the framework.
They all assume it's the entirety, and they read to the end.
But I also don't think they dispose the underlying thing in the parser.
Well, nothing here disposes anything.
No, I meant like if you would accept the stream, right? I don't think it actually defeats the stream. I think the caller is responsible for doing that.
Right. So So the problem with the
that's fair.
stream with read first instead of the entire is we now have either we throw because we unconditionally call seek back 5 bytes and it says I'm sorry I'm not seekable, or we say if you give me a non-seekable stream, I have corrupted your data, party on. And so I think that if we're adding the stream overload, that is always drained in the end. And at which point you don't want it anyway. Which means we shouldn't have it.
I am not sure.
Here, I'm checking the XML document just for precedence. Maybe.
Yeah, if we're doing read first, then we need to tell you how much we didn't process. And I'm okay with that. Just we need to figure out what that means.
What if we call it load rather than parse?
I don't care. Parse is, aside from in the XML document API, parse is the word that we usually use to mean turn something that looks like text into something that looks like an object.
Because I'm just looking to see like what XML document does, for instance, when we load it.
Well, the difference in XML document is that if you say load with a string,
Yeah.
we expect this to be a URI, so we download the contents and parse them.
No, with a stream, a system IO stream.
So there's no parse with a stream, I believe.
There is XML document.load of stream.
Yeah, there's load, but there's no parse.
Right.
So parse is basically given text, you get a document. Everything else is load.
Given text, you get a document.
Yes.
How is that different than load?
Because if you pass a string to load,
Yeah.
it usually is a path. So that's
Load
what.
of-
Yes.
Load of string.
Load of string is a file name, yes.
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 So that would be why we don't rename parse to load.
Yes.
Because it takes a string.
But every other overload expects the actual data
Of XML doc.
of XML document,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, not great. I think that's a.
Yes, we could change
that's
this
an
from parse to
API.
load JSON, but like
Yeah.
now it's longer. Yeah, so again, like, I mean, you know, we do have some conflicting guidance here of things that were written in framework design guidelines and things that we do. Framework design guidelines says don't use outs.
Well, all our new since span parse APIs, they parse as much as they can, and they tell you how much they parse.
Yes, but those are mainly meant for power developers who are trying to read chunks of data from effectively an endless stream. This is meant for like a higher level consumer.
Correct. I agree with that a bit, but the thing is, so what is my recourse? Let's say
Yeah.
somebody did store in a text file
Yeah.
multiple JSON documents. What is my recourse now? What code can I write?
Do people actually do this? Like it
Right.
seems like we're trying to say here's a behavior that we should have without evidence that people have a .json file that just has invalid JSON in it, which is effectively what you're saying.
So
Okay. So what would we do when we discover that it's an important scenario?
Then we can change the APIs at that point. We
Oh.
can maybe have a parse first valid JSON object
So-
or something.
if we took what we have right now, so let's ignore string for a
Yeah.
moment. If we took what we have right now and we copy and paste all of these with a trailing as much as we can, given that it has a default parameter, out in consumed, so bytes consumed for the bytes ones and chars consumed for the chars and string. Then that one would be, you call the out one, and that one will read the first one and tell you how much it read. And the one that doesn't give you the out is, you expect this is built in, and so it builds in if the length of what I read is not equal to the length of the input throw. And we could do that. And then that would also be that if we don't do that now, that would be the extension we do. The stream one, again, complicates things with read first, because not all streams support crap, I read too much.
Yeah.
And that one feels to me like we would not have the consumed one. It would be this one drains to the end. And
Well,
if
or
you want-
it could be you pass me a string that is not seekable. It's your problem.
I mean,
that's
actually
fair. I mean, that would be
Yeah.
the we let seek throw
Yeah.
of like
No.
There's another option, which is considering the implementation. Sorry, considering the implementation right now is just going to basically buffer everything into a giant array until we have a better option, a better implementation. We could just externalize this and have streamReader.read_to_end or something that returns the byte array from the stream, and then you just pass it into one of these existing overloads and leave it entirely outside a JSON document. And if you do that, then this whole discussion about seeking and whatnot entirely goes away.
Yep. Sure. We could, but today we don't have a convenient way to drain a stream. There is no API.
I'm suggesting we would add such a convenient way.
Yeah.
As part of this feature? Or as part of the future edition of this feature?
It logically is part of it because it's necessary to complete the scenario, but it would actually be useful for other things.
Sure.
Would it be a portable API?
No.
We have stream reader read to end.
It's portable because in the sense that it's somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can copy and paste the code if you want to.
Stream reader.
I mean, I'm not giving you like a portable method, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
you can do it on
this whole discussion started with me saying basically that are you guys gonna have adapters because I have streams, and now you're saying yes, we're not gonna add a parse method that takes a stream. We're gonna add an API, but you will not be able to use it.
Well, I mean,
this whole
you're saying it's not very convenient, but it's
better.
like going to be what, like 10 lines of code or something?
No, it's not 10 lines. It's not non-trivial.
Copying an entire stream to
Yes.
an allocated byte array, why would that be a lot of work?
Because, well, I don't know if it's to one array or many arrays. I mean, it's not trivial. Trust me.
If you want
You have to resize. You have to copy. Like it's not trivial.
Unless you have the happy stream that tells you how long it is a priori, you just keep guessing
Sure.
with like, try some more.
I think what Christoph really coming down to is like it's easy for us to do the naive implementation of take this stream and turn it into a single byte array, but is that actually what people want in practice?
Well, I mean, I think the question in general is like if you do this, like what are the sizes you expect to be passed in, right? Like if you expect this to be like gigabytes of data, then maybe that's not great. But I don't think it will be gigabytes of data in practice, right? It will be in the megabyte realm.
No, it has nothing to do with the megabytes or not. If the stream doesn't give you length, and even if it gives you length, it's non-trivial because it can basically, depending what the stream is, it can give you the data in chunks and like it's basically it has there are many modes. Stream is an abstraction for so many different behaviors, and like to write this drain to a single byte array it needs to account for all the behaviors.
Maybe I don't understand how this thing would differ from you allocate a buffer that you guess 4K, you keep copying, and then you keep calling like read into that thing. Once you run out of thing, you reallocate your byte array, growing it by whatever number you come up with. You keep doing this, and eventually you have a byte array whose length you know, and then you just create one more one.
And resizing byte arrays and doing it with cancellations, this and that. Like it's not trivial. I mean, it's not like rocket science. The point is that like people shouldn't be writing DCLs.
Right. I mean, it's list of T. I mean, this is what list of T does under the covers, right? You add stuff, it checks, it resizes, but like Christoph said, there is now more complication because you're doing it in a loop. You have a cancellation token.
Well, it's basically list of T where you only have add range.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. If you look at the code that does that in list of T, if you just went down to add range, I don't think it's that much code. Like you have a policy how you grow, and like that's it, right?
No, I think we could do it without too much hassle.
Yeah.
It's just, as Christoph said, we don't want the average developer to have to write this.
No, but I think that's a different statement from we need a portable API. I'm saying I agree with you. We should have the API.
Yeah.
I think in practice for the people that need a portable API, that there's not that many people, and those can copy the code if they really care that much. Like I think it doesn't strike me as a necessarily bad idea. I think it would be way worse to expose a single method in a portable fashion, just because we cannot have stream dot, read to end or something, right? Which is where the API logically belongs.
I don't know. I'm not even sure. I'm not even convinced that stream read to end is long-term the best solution. Because, for example, if this implementation was smarter and actually was doing something with read-only sequence, you don't want stream read to end. I mean,
that's a different argument. So you're saying like you don't even want stream then. What you're saying, you don't even want a byte or whatever version of that. You want something that literally takes a stream?
Yeah, I think that would be actually Like, I don't know why we started to discuss it, then we kind of rolled back and said,
Right. So I mean, the question is, what's the policy on? So if we do parse as we throw the moment that there's something past the final semantic token,
Right.
Then that one is fine and easy to do as a stream. The problem is if it's the one that does only the first JSON payload, then either we throw in non-seekable streams, or we have some notion of if it's not seekable, we corrupt or whatever. So it's about the policy of if we add parse first, either that being as an overload that outs the number consumed, or we make a new method group called parse first, which outs the number of things consumed.
Is parse first always well defined? Do we know when the thing is at the end?
we know when we are at the end, but it may be too late. We might have already read too much data.
If it's from
the
a stream.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Because we can only read from a stream in chunks.
So we have the following options. We could, as Jeremy said, in this case, we throw. We only throw if it's non-seekable.
Which is we unconditionally call seek.
Third option, we
Read by
we leave the stream as is, and we say we don't care. You should have passed a seekable stream. And fourth option is we give you the data back that we overread.
So the stream one would out overread, or out byte bracket overread instead of out
This is just complicating things.
Yeah,
like, this is
like,
weird.
No, I just listed
what do you
I
do with
listed
that?
the options. I'm not saying that I.
So, but let's say, I think honestly, the one that I think is the most logical one would be you basically check in parse if the stream is seekable, and if not, you usually throw and say you can't do that. But if we do that, then by definition, that stream has a length, which now means creating a byte array of the right size and copying all the data in is trivial.
Well, it is trivia. It is trivia that people often get wrong because they assume that if they call read, that it will fill the buffer that they give them instead of it could return a number smaller than that. So there is a correct thing to do.
And also the thing is so for many low-level APIs, we kind of said those are primitives. Let's not have this. What is the reason not to add a stream?
No. All I'm saying is, do you agree with what I just said?
No, I don't. It's still not trivial. It gets easier and easier, but it's not trivial.
So
there's no reason not to add this method. That takes a
Sorry,
stream.
what are you talking about, Christoph?
But are you okay with, I think by the way I'm trying to get this, are you okay with a stream method that throws when it's not seekable? Are all the
If
streams...
there's more data after the end. I wouldn't throw if it's not seekable stream.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it throws if it reaches at the end, there's more data, and it's not seekable.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you cannot parse a network stream even if it's completely valid JSON, because it's not seekable. You don't want that behavior. You want to be able to parse non-seekable streams.
I don't think you would want to throw a raw network stream into this API, to be honest. Generally, if you're getting JSON from the network, generally it's going to be within a MIME envelope as part of an HTTP request, which will have its own inner stream, which represents just the request payload. Which means that when that stream terminates, it's the end of the JSON.
Non-seekable wrapping the underlying stream that's non-seekable.
Yeah, the content stream is also not seekable.
No, that's fine, because you expect the stream only to ever have a JSON document and absolutely nothing else in it.
Sure.
So
you would agree with me, we shouldn't be throwing if parse is called on non-seekable stream.
no, that actually goes back to what we were saying earlier of if there's anything at the end of the document, fail. Just straight up fail.
For non-seekable stream.
No, just straight up fail.
So now this is the option. This is one of the options, which is we could either always throw if it's more, or we could only throw if it's not seekable.
Right. So I think if any method that doesn't out you how much it read throws if there's extra data. Right. To me that seems obvious.
Say it again.
The parse method as the signature currently is, should throw if there is extraneous data at the end.
Because it doesn't return you how much it read. Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
So now if we make overloads that return the value of how much was read,
then the stream equivalent, I think, would be that it outs a byte array of what it overread, and if the stream was seekable, this gives you back array.empty, because it simply put the stream in the right position.
Okay. It's a very strange API, as I said it's an option, but it's very strange.
But it actually seems to make sense of these are the bytes. These bytes are bytes that I had that I can't put back, and like you need to take them, and this is your problem, buddy.
Yeah.
So if you're composing, you're dead if that ever returns.
So I think it's an awesome API for a low-level type. This one is too high-level.
Right. So alternatively, we just don't the stream one. We only have the read to end option, and if you have a stream that has more than one thing, you have to buffer it yourself.
So with the UTF-8 JSON Reader API, you should be able to tell yourself when the end of a document is, right?
Yes, but I have to then read twice. I have to first read to determine where is the end, then wrap the stream in a bounded stream that I have to develop because we don't have it in BCL, and then pass it to you.
Well,
pass it to you.
No, then you rent from the array pool the number of bytes that you care about, and then you fill that, and then you give me that, and I operate on that. And
But what we should do is offline, like we should just sit down with you and figure out what the scenario is where you can't tell ahead of time where the end of the JSON document is.
As I said, I was not even proposing that we do it in V1. I was just saying, what would we do if we run into this scenario? Because, you know, like we ship many APIs and then we're like, should we now have a scenario? Okay, now it's butchered.
So if this is just a future question, then my answer would be we either overload those guys or make a new method group called parse first, which then outs whatever piece of data you need. If it's all these guys, it's outs the length of what it consumed. If it's this guy, it is this is the data I can't help you with. And then it's a question of is that logically overloaded or is it a different name of parse first because it's a different functionality. So
for stream, yes. And what about the memory?
Same thing. We would make parse first, memory out, bytes consumed.
Okay, so I'll give you a concrete scenario for.
We do have to start shutting this down, by the way.
Yeah.
Maybe I know how to slice it. The ones with memory, what I worry about is I rented a byte array from a buffer pool. It has data in it. I write JSON to it. The JSON ends, but there's some data because it was not cleared from the pool.
All right, thanks guys online.
Then why did you not slice the memory to what you wrote?
Because I need to know where it's the end. So that requires